Welcome to Empowered, Mind-Body Inspiration. The mind is the map to wholeness, wellness, health. The heart is the key to genius and inspiration. Join me and my guests as we explore how to release and rewire into who you truly are, unique, whole, and empowered. Please like, share, and subscribe. Spiral up, spiral out. Welcome, everyone. Today we have Marina Reed, a Canadian. Marina has lived and worked as an educator, an artist, a journalist, and a writer. She is co-author of the book series, Remember It's Okay, a new way to work with grief. You can find her books at marinalreed.com. Marina has written 2 fictional novels, It's Lonely in Paradise and Primrose Street, both based on Marina's own life learning and her wish to empower others to find their superhero within. Welcome, Marina.
Hi.
So good to have you. So tell us a little bit about
Nice to be here.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about this novel. It's Lonely in Paradise. Just give us the Coles notes on what that novel is about, and then we'll get into why you wrote it and, a little bit of the backstory in your own life and why it was so important, because I know it was written to empower others.
Right. Yeah, and that's exactly it. I think most of the work, well, all of the work that I do actually is about trying to empower others, help them find that authentic self. And often there is a lot of fear around stepping into who you are. We seem to still take so much of our validation from outside rather than becoming empowered, which I love that title of your podcast, because that's what this is all about. The whole book is about really finding who you are from the inside out rather than being so influenced from the outside. And everybody has awful things that happen to them, difficult things that we have to figure out. But it's what we do with those things. And I think sometimes we get caught in a trap, a societal trap that just keeps us on that same path. So It's Lonely in Paradise is about that journey into self, where you think that it's what you're doing is empowering, but at the end of the day, it really wasn't the thing that you needed to do.
Right? Because we often go on to, big adventures thinking that we're going to solve a problem when it could have been solved right in our own backyard, or right in our own homes or in our own heart.
Right, exactly.
So what is the book about in a nutshell? Can you give us just a brief synopsis?
So the main character, the heroine, her name is Heather, and she has experienced a loss of her trust in her relationship and her life. And so she decides that maybe what she should do is go and help others, but instead of doing it around the corner, she decides to go halfway around the world and become a support for another country, a developed country. And I think lots of people think to do that. And in the midst of that adventure, she starts to realize that even with the tremendous beauty all around her, that there is this undercurrent, and that having traveled halfway across the world, the difficulties that she was experiencing at home are actually magnified in this place. She meets somebody that puts her back into the same mindset that she was in when she left. And because of the raw, almost brutality, I think, of different, especially some developing countries, there can be a very rawness about a lot of things. It pushed her over the edge where she realized that she couldn't keep doing the same things anymore, and that it wasn't the geographical fix that was going to change things. It was going to be how she learned to do things differently. And the book, to me, was to try to help people see that it's not somebody on the outside that's going to change things for you. You have to become your own hero. And that is sometimes a difficult thing. It's not an easy thing to do. But as she says in the second part of the book, that she finally feels that she's learned these new dance steps, and that it's those dance steps that now will carry her forward.
Right. So she came home and used those, what she had learned, and did it in Canada.
Right. And the last line in the book says something to the effect of, it's sort of like the Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. Paradise was right here. I just didn't see it. And we always seem to think that, grass is greener on the other side of the fence. Paradise is where the sun shines all the time and you have blue water. And we go and travel to some of these places and think that that would be the solution, that is going to be all perfect. But in reality, there's struggles everywhere. And we have to find that safe space inside of who we are before. It doesn't matter where we live. It's not going to make a difference until we find that. And even though she says she learned these new dance steps, it's easy when you've done the same steps for so long. It's very easy to fall back into that pattern. So it requires some real conviction to really change the way that you're thinking and the way that you're moving forward. It's not something that's just immediate. It's not a snap of the fingers, but there was a true resonance that she realized that this is what she had to do.
Yeah, beautiful. I remember going to Croatia after the war and with a group that were going to help in Croatia. And I came back with the same realization that even though we had gone and we were trying to help, the really barely touched other people enough. And I came back realizing that really I would make a big difference in my own backyard, and just to put my efforts there, even if it's the smallest, gentlest, tiniest thing that you can do on a daily basis. Daily,
Yeah,
your own life,
that's very true. And I think that is a very strong theme that comes through in the book, that often when we go to developing countries, or even communities, they don't have to be developing countries. They can be communities that are struggling. And we think that we're going to go and make a difference. There can be a huge amount of resentment for someone coming in and telling you, this is how you should do it, and this is what you need to do. And we have lots of history that impinges on us. And so that was one of the things that becomes apparent in the book, is that her desire to go and help was not received as she thought it would be. It wasn't accepted. It was actually huge amounts of resentment. And because she was working there, she wasn't a tourist, the minute she started collecting a paycheck because she was working there, the resentment actually grew even stronger. And that's something that we don't see when we go and stay in a place in a protected, resort, and we never leave. But she was living right in the community where they were still washing clothes on rocks and rivers, and people were living in boxes, and, quite abrupt, not something that you're going to see when you go on your holiday. And I guess the thing when you realize that if you really truly want to make a difference, it's true, you need to do it in your backyard first, because let's face it, there is a lot of stuff that can use our attention and our love and our commitment right in our backyard. We don't have to travel halfway around the world to do that.
Right. Well, it's a beautiful novel. And, even the way you describe the living conditions and getting food was a major expedition regularly, and the heat, and you describe it so beautifully.
Oh, thank you. It was, yeah, obviously this story is based on a true story. It was based on the trip that I did. There are a lot of things that, of course, are created so that the narrative flows, and that's the thing about fiction, that you can shift those things around to create the story. But the essence of the book, the essence of the character, the essence of the healing was very much heartfelt for me, because it was really my healing that allowed that to come through in the book. There was such angst, though. There was such incredible contradiction and just juxtaposition to so many things. The incredible absolute beauty of the place, the tremendous violence and poverty, and those extremes were actually quite difficult to try to adjust to, and I'm not sure that you ever really do. So that was a really difficult thing. And at the end, it was I remember when I first came back, and I was so grateful to finally be back, I would have sold my passport to the first person that asked me for it.
Just to get back.
Well, I had no desire to ever leave again. I mean, we talk about corruption here, but we have really, the level of corruption is tiny compared to what it is in regimes that really don't respect the humanity as much as some other countries. I mean, we all struggle for sure, but I got one of the characters in the book that I did become quite good friends with. It was 13 years since I had seen them, and she was a native of the place that I was living in. And she felt herself, there was such repression that she had to marry a foreigner in order to be able to leave the country. And then there's sort of this hidden, sort of unspoken, almost like a law, that there is definite fear. I mean, she didn't even feel she could go back without running the risk of not being able to leave again. There is much more control than I think people realize in a lot of countries. And so she wasn't able to go back and see her mother. When her mother got really sick, there was just such fear that she wouldn't be able to leave again. And so 13 years is a long time. And I remember I went to visit them. They were in Europe. And I said to them, is my memory accurate? Was it that bad? And they both looked at me and said, no, it was worse. And that was actually quite validating for me, because I think over time we soften things, and, we sort of say that, maybe it wasn't as bad as it was. And to have other people sort of say, no, it's not good. It wasn't good. It still isn't good.
Yeah.
And that just reinforced for me how important it was to write the book. And we can tell a story of how a culture and a place affects us. We're not taking away from somebody else's story. We're talking about how we come to see what's going on. And I think it's really important that we measure each other on the planet by being able to hear, wow, that's how that person sees that. That's really, I don't have that perspective myself. So we need to be able to hear how we are seen by others in order to create a balance. And I think sometimes this fear of saying what actually is not pleasant in a society or in a group or a community, I'm not sure that's the best way for us to go forward, honestly, because then we're just pretending that everything is fine, and it's not.
Yeah. In order to heal, you need to go deep into a reality or an experience. So it needs to be talked about.
It does need to be talked about. And I think to not talk about something, I mean, this whole cultural appropriation that became and still is, but the edge is off it now. But it was like no one is allowed to talk about any other culture. And I know a number of writers, a number of people in the academic world really spoke out about that and said, when I read something, I want to know the perspectives of everybody. And maybe this person is going to give a perspective on that community that we need to hear. It can't always be internal. It can't always be coming from that particular group because there's a protection. But maybe we need to see how it's gone awry. Maybe we need to be able to see how it affects somebody else. And that can allow for growth. And again, to become your own hero, to change the dynamic. We all get caught in these spirals that can lift us up or that can pull us down. And I think it's about lifting us up and lifting each other up and not being so afraid to say something that, maybe isn't really pretty.
Yeah. I love how you say to be your own hero, and that requires courage, and it requires a belief in yourself that you can make a difference and make change within yourself and those around you. But it's
right, exactly.
Yeah, we so often give that power away to something else or someone else. But so that's a beautiful part of that book. I also love the way you went back into your childhood, and that seemed like a very healing part of writing this book.
Yeah, I think like some of those are really a piece from my past. Others were created in order to have that narrative flow. So it's interesting, if I was to go through and say, yeah, this is real or this is not real, this is tweaked a little bit. But I think that when we are able to start pulling things out from our past and not have them in the shadows anymore, so that then we can look at them and as the person that we are and the person that we are becoming, then they don't haunt us so much anymore. But we seem to forget sometimes how, we stay in our moment, but we still are affected by things that have happened to us. And so that was one of the reasons that I did that there is a lot of flashbacks in the story to show how what she's experiencing in this country is the same angst as she was experiencing in other places at home. So again, like there's many moments that kind of try to show how we can't run away. We can't run away from those things that plague us. And why are those things so difficult for us? And sometimes the key is, what happened when we were younger.
Mm-hmm. So true. Well, yeah, even what happens to us when we're young children, we don't have an ability to reason it out, and it stays there running in the background, and we end up with these beliefs that absolutely should have no power over us, but they tend to really have quite the power. Yeah. So when I was a kid, I felt really treated as an outsider, like pushed out of the group. And so that made me not only go within, but have a lot of empathy for anyone that was not part of the group. But, you talk about how your father was with you and some of the things that you needed to overcome. Can you share any of those?
Yeah, I think relationships with our parents are difficult, and especially, well, some people have the gift that they're not difficult, but I think a lot of people do struggle. And I think that permission to be able to say that if I knew this person and they weren't my parent, what would I think of that person as far as how they treat others or how they treat me? And I think if the answer is, yeah, I wouldn't really want that person around me, I think that we need to have more permission to say that. Because to keep pretending or hoping that everything's going to change is good. But at the same time, I think we have to be realistic about damage that's done and whether somebody is not making any attempt to change how they are. And that doesn't mean we don't have to talk to them anymore, but it does change the interaction that we have for sure. Because learning those new dance steps, that's part of the new dance, is not allowing yourself to feel obligated to be around people who are destructive to you, whoever that is. And I think that becoming your own hero, and if you read the book, that is a very powerful theme in the book, is coming to terms with the fact that we have to learn how to say no, no matter who that is.
Yeah. Yeah. And somehow, you know, when it's our parents and we owe them so much that it's really hard, or family. What were some of the destructive beliefs that you had to overcome?
Well, I think I had a very, I was also always a great achiever, but I never really got the support that I needed from my parents. So I never really had the sense that um, I never had the sense, I never had an empowered sense of myself. I never had a really strong sense of self-worth, which is interesting because of the things that I've done. Nobody ever would have thought that about me. And very, very few people actually know that about me. So because we have achievements that we do, whether or not we actually can accept those is really different. And I think since writing the book was very cathartic for me in many, many ways. And it was definitely the beginning of, new dance steps for me. And I think it's a constant creation of this new dance that we learn, and making sure that we supervise our thoughts, so that, because our brain is very programmed, but we can change that program. So that then becomes the goal is, do I really want to think differently? Do I really want to live differently? Do I really want to see myself differently and not the way I've been told that I should see myself? Then that's really what the essence of the book is really find out who you are, regardless of what anybody else has said.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, isn't it? Because if you look back after you've healed some of those things or empowered yourself, you realize that all the things that happened to you as a child made you who you were and gave you empathy and understanding in a way that couldn't have happened without it. But, the real growth only happens after you're able to see it and for what it is, and then let it go.
Yeah, and that's true, because you can stay in that same cycle for the rest of your whole life, or there's that moment of awareness, and that's the moment that you either step into who you are and work toward that, or you stay in that destructive cycle. And I think that's a really important transition and movement, is to be able to see, yes, this is what started me, but I don't have to be in that position anymore. I don't have to think like that and be like that anymore. There is the ability to rewire how you see your world and see yourself. And I think that becomes like a new doorway that opens, but you're the only one that can open that door.
Exactly. Yeah. So, yeah,
So we
that's,
don't have to be a victim or a slave to what has happened to us. It's there, but it doesn't have to be the way that we continue. And yes, it's true, you can't change those things and you can't change other people, but it's interesting how things start to change when you start looking at them differently. And there really is quite an amazing power in that. Until you get to that point, though, everything is looked at through that veil of either self-doubt and not strong self-worth, or it's looked at through the other glass. And that one changes how you perceive everything. And I think as I go forward now, I have a much different sense of who I am and what I'm capable of, in so many different areas. I think it's a constant. When you've started out with difficulty, it is a constant awareness that you have to have. It gets easier, but it's lonely in paradise is obviously a metaphor to saying that it doesn't matter how wonderful or beautiful a place can be. We can be lonely if we don't have that sense of who we are. Because the one thing that we have and that never leaves is that person that looks at us in the mirror. And we have to make friends with that person.
Right. And to truly love that person. And
exactly.
Right. And to think that all these beliefs that made you not love yourself actually came from someone else.
And somebody that apparently loved you, which is, I think, the really difficult thing. How can someone who apparently loves you make you feel so bad about yourself? But that's a large subject, because obviously there was issues that they had that they couldn't deal with. And, sometimes I think, boy, if I take me back 25 years and give me what I know now, it would be interesting how many things maybe I would have made the same decisions, but I would have felt different about them. And I think that's the big difference right there.
Yeah. Well, it's made you into a strong, compassionate, caring human being that shares so much of what your experience is.
Oh, thank you.
But let's look at, so one of the things that you said your father told you, and I always grew up thinking I was too short and not pretty enough. But your dad said to you that you were fat, and then you developed, eating disorders. And I'm like, oh, to put that little girl on a lap and to make her see just how pretty and beautiful she was. Like, it's
yeah, it's awful when parents use food. I'm quite sensitive to that when I'm around any children and I notice their parents are making comments like that. I'm very, very sensitive to that. I remember when I was in university, and I would write for extra money. I wrote fashion shows. It was a big thing, I guess, then in the 80s. And so one time, and I would write them and I would commentate them. I never was on the runway, but this one time somebody was sick and they couldn't go. And so the organizer asked me if I would replace her. And so it was easier apparently to get somebody to do that than change the commentary. So I said, sure, that's fine. And she said, well, what size are you? And I said, oh, about a 12 or a 13. And she said, okay, well, go over to that rack and just put on whatever you like in that rack and then come over here and we'll make a decision about what we're going to wear. So I did that. I came over and she looked at me and she said, honey, what you've just put on is a size 8.
Yeah.
And I never, ever, ever forgot that, because my image of myself was so much bigger and distorted than it actually was. That took me a long, long, long time to get over. I think those kinds of things are really, really, they get to really the deep core of us when we're, food is such an elemental thing, and to be criticized when you're eating or what you're eating, or it's just it's a very, very destructive thing.
And it can be just in passing. It could be teasing. They may not even mean it, but as a child, you take it on.
Oh, no, he meant it.
He did, eh?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, he wasn't the nicest person. He had moments here and there, but yeah, he seemed to like it when other people weren't very happy.
And now you can see it was probably because he wasn't happy himself.
I think that's true. I think that's true. But as a child, you have no, ability to understand that. So
Yeah. I often look back at childhood and the beliefs I took on, and how do you know the way to heal that is actually to put that child on your knee and talk to her. It's
yeah.
an incredibly moving experience with the eyes you have now.
I think that every parent, some maybe not. I don't think my dad ever really wanted kids, and I think that was a problem. I think when you have children, you didn't really want them. There's that extra level. But even parents who are good parents, the experience, their experience and the child's experience, you can't ever be guaranteed that what you're doing is going to be okay. I mean, if you're compassionate and you're kind and you're caring, that's going to make a big difference. But that child is going to grow up and maybe process things that you did that wasn't your intention. So I think that the most important thing for a parent is to be able to listen to their child, no matter how young or old they are, and maybe especially as they get older, and to be able to have that conversation and hear what they're saying. Like, when you do this, this is how I feel. And then for the parent to be able to make an adjustment. And that's then how healing happens so much more quickly, because there's awareness and conversation together and movement that can happen together. And it's not an easy thing, but I think it's a tremendously rewarding thing, because everybody is going to have something that they're going to need to make their own when they become an adult.
Yeah. And I do believe that we're born into families where we can learn the most, or that
Yeah.
the tools will come that we'll use.
Mm-hmm.
So to see it in the end with gratitude is really important too.
And not always easy.
No, but I always think of sharpening a knife, right? It's not an easy process for the knife. I mean, you're using something harsh and to sharpen, but that's kind of like what life is.
Yeah, and I guess we forget we are. I think older cultures didn't put happiness and joy at the front. There was more of a balance that we have to have both in order to go forward. It's an experience. And even if it's a difficult thing that's happening, it's an experience. So experience it, learn from it, decide whether you want to take it forward with you or not. But everything is an experience, and it's what we choose to do with that experience, how we choose to grow with that experience, what our awareness, how will it expand because of that. And that it would be lovely if we could have that kind of learning in our schools. If we could
Wouldn't it?
have, meditation in our schools, if we could have things that would happen to allow people to go inside themselves and find their power right from the beginning. That would be magical.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
So Marina, I know you wrote 2 novels. The next one is Primrose Street. How does this lead into that?
So Primrose Street is a story about a community where something tragic happens, but everybody in the community is aware. And I think it's really the story, again, about becoming your own hero, but it's also about being able to allow everybody their authentic self. So I'm dealing with the issues of homosexuality, transgender, domestic abuse. There's quite a dark side to the book, but the ending is very uplifting. And that there is that ability for us to have hope in terms of how can we learn to stand together and allow people to be who they are and go forward together, rather than having expectations of where people need to fit. And if they don't fit where we think they should be, then we're going to persecute them, because there's just so many variables in our world and in individuals. And if we can open that door to allow for really honest communication, I think that would solve so many of our problems. I mean, that's going to take some time for sure, but I think the whole issue of speaking and allowing each other to live real, authentic lives rather than being afraid of saying who you are for fear of repercussion. I mean, there has to be a point where that eventually will stop.
Yeah. Well, it's another program, isn't it, that we're taught that we need to be a certain way, look a certain way.
Right.
But,
Right. And that comes from lots of reasons, but I think it's time. We are at a point of evolution. We are at a point of evolving past religious narratives that put us into little boxes, and they're tiny little boxes, and we don't fit in tiny little boxes. We never have. And I think there is a point now in our history, this current history we're making, that it's time for the next evolution of understanding and awareness. And that's coming. It has to come.
yeah, I believe we're moving into it. But
Yeah,
the
I think so.
recognition that if everyone is their authentic self, then it adds a piece to the whole, and
Exactly. And that ability, as we start to stop, as we are less judgmental, then we are able to learn so much more from others. And I think that expansiveness and that ability to see the world through different eyes is really, quite a gift. And I find, it happens to me every day that there is something else that I can learn and see the world a little differently because I've listened to what somebody else has to say.
yeah. Well, on the daily, you have to, it's so interesting because if you try to control what's happening, you get blocked usually.
Right.
And when you let go and just allow the other person or the situation to happen as it will, there's so much learning there and beauty that you could not allow to unfold unless you let go.
Right. And it's that fear that keeps us in that restricted state, in that place that doesn't want to accept that maybe that person is doing that. And if they're kind and gentle and they're not hurting anybody else, I think we have to sort of grow up. It's time that we grow up a little bit and step outside of this fear that has been ruling us for quite a while now.
Yeah. Fear really has a way of making you into a rigid, controlling.
Yes.
Yeah. And
well, fear contracts us and love expands us. So, I mean, that kind of says it all, doesn't it?
Right. And I was talking to a girlfriend last week, and she was reading someone's work, but they were saying that really nothing exists but love, and anything that has fear, you should just let it go as not even existing. And so she was just saying how she liked to focus on even what's going on now, just the good parts, the love part, and it'll help us move through it and into a whole new situation. I love that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. That's definitely the direction that we need to start going.
So what else happened?
And I don't think we can hear it enough.
No, I don't think we can hear it enough.
Sorry?
I think we need to keep.
No, we can't hear it enough because, yeah, we do, because we're still living, the predominant energy is still one of fear and judgment. And so we can't hear the message enough of the option that there is. And I think that's Lonely in Paradise and Primrose Street. I have another book that I've just finished as well. And all of them are talking about the same thing. So I think we need to keep speaking about it. We need to keep hearing it, whether we're reading it, whether we're listening to podcasts, because that's the only way that something inside us will be tweaked to say, yeah, there's a different way we can be doing this.
Mm-hmm. What else happened in Primrose Street for you?
Well, I think every piece of fiction obviously is based on nonfiction, and it's a matter of what we take and how we weave it into the story that we're going to do. So in Primrose Street, I think, you have these little vignettes that you collect in your life, people that you've met, things that you've experienced, things that somebody else has experienced, you know, a good friend, and you sort of go through that with them. And so Primrose Street is the story of those collections brought together. And then I wove it into this story with a number of characters. It's very much like a Maeve Binchy novel, where she has quite a number of characters, and you get to know them all, but you get to know this character and how they're seeing the community, and then you get to know this character, and it's from their perspective. So you get this myriad of different perspectives. And then how is that all going to come together at the end? How is it going to be resolved? And will it be resolved for everybody? And that's very realistic in the sense that some people will grow and shift, and some people just are too afraid to do that. And that's very much what Primrose Street is about. I love both of them. Primrose Street has a very powerful message as well.
Interesting, because even if you had 10 different people look at one scenario or situation that we all came upon, we would all see it differently depending on our background and veil, like you were saying. Yeah.
Right. And if those perspectives come from one of fear and judgment or self-loathing, then that still plays into the whole scenario. So I think that's a good point you make, because that's exactly what happens in Primrose Street. And you get to see how the lives that each one of these people has, how that has impacted on choices they've made. And there's that ripple effect until at the end of the book, there is something that happens and they all have to make a choice. And that choice will lead them forward or keep them stuck where they are.
Beautiful. I would encourage all of us to read that book.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think it's a very powerful and a very important message in the book.
Yeah.
And fiction allows us to, sometimes I think fiction can allow us more comfort because we feel that distance. It's like, oh, well, that's about that person over there. But when you're reading something that's nonfiction, it can be so personal. You can feel like it's about you. And that sometimes can be really scary because you aren't ready to look at it that clearly yourself. But when you're reading about other people, you can pick and choose what you're going to identify with. And you read the book again, and then you're like, oh yeah, I see that a little more now. But it's a safety. It's the distance that gives safety into finally being able to look at it yourself.
Yeah. Well, I really admire your ability to write. And is there any advice you would give someone that wanted to share through writing? Because it requires digging deep and seeing something that.
It does. I think you can't be afraid of being vulnerable. And I think the more authentic it is what you write, it's almost like you have to be, well, it's not almost like, you have to be in that spot. You have to live what you're writing. And if it's not, it doesn't come through as powerfully. And there are a number of sections when I had to do some editing, especially on Primrose Street. I really didn't want to have to keep reading this one section because I knew I had to crawl back into that. And it was difficult. It was very hard to be in that. But unless you're feeling it, if you don't feel it, the person that's reading it is not going to feel it either. So I think that writing has to be authentic. And if it's authentic, then it will have a mark, regardless of what it is that you're writing.
Yeah. And then, and when it's authentic, there's that beautiful message out there forever.
Right. Exactly. And I'm proud of these two books. I think they were brave. I think they're dealing with some very difficult issues. I think they have a feeling of hope and movement in both of them, even though that there are some very difficult issues that are raised in them. And I think that was the goal, is that You know, it's not going to be all roses and sunshine all the time, but the way we deal with that can make it a beautiful experience. And when we start being able to see that, I think it makes it a different journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Where would people find these books?
They are on Amazon. Both of them are on Amazon, and I guess depending on where people are living, that's probably the easiest. They are also at Indigo, and I guess your independent bookstores can always get them in. They can always order them. So
Yeah, can they be pointed in the right direction from your website?
yeah, actually, I have icons on my website that you can just click on to go and order the book.
Which is
.com.
marinalreed.com.
Yeah.
Very good. And I'll put that into the description at the bottom of this
Okay.
podcast.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. Such beautiful wisdom you shared today.
Well, thank you for allowing me the chance to do that. It's lovely to be able to maybe, you know, you never know who's listening, that one little thing you say might be the spark that allows them to say, yes, maybe it's time for me to get out of this cycle and start something new. And if that happens, then that's wonderful.
Yeah. And even just put that child on their knee and ask what the experience was about and what they should do with it.
Yeah, and how to love that child.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jayne. I love what you're doing. It's beautiful. All of your interviews are so insightful. It's beautiful what you're doing. Thank you so much.
All about and just empowering. That's what.
Yeah, empowered. It's fantastic.
Thank you. And for everyone out there, don't forget, don't give away your power to anyone else. Just spiral up, spiral out.